50mm f1.4 lenses are often the most desired and loved workhorse lenses of any camera system. And with Leica lenses being so coveted, the Summilux 50mm spherical could be the definitive 50mm lens, right? Well, as it turns out, at one point I was actually searching for the best 50mm lens for my M-mount cameras, and thanks to Leica Store Miami at workshops and other occasions, I was able to test out this fantastic lens. The 50mm Summilux spherical exemplifies why so many photographers dream of Leica optics. Whenever I come across this lens, I'm always enamored by its build quality and design, both in the hand and in use. The copy I tested was the silver version, which is made of brass, and I just cannot stress enough how premium of a lens this is. That being said, I did find it a bit front heavy when mounted on, say, the Leica M3. The standard black version is slightly lighter though, and I think it should provide a better balance when it comes to most M-mount cameras. That being said, beyond the luxury feel of this lens, I think that one of the best design aspects of it is actually the focus tab. And it's something that isn't really present on most modern Leica 50mm lenses, which is a real shame because it helps out quite a bit when it comes to focusing in the finder or on the fly from the hip. So usability and design definitely make this a dream-worthy lens, but what about the images themselves? As you would expect from a modern Leica spherical lens, we see excellent sharpness and image quality throughout the aperture range and focus range. Within a spherical element, chromatic aberrations are very difficult to find in normal photographing circumstances, and the implementation of a floating element system means image quality should remain consistent at any focus distance. Even wide open, image quality and sharpness is what you would expect from a 50mm lens at, say, f2.8 or higher. I also did a very quick and crude comparison between the Summilux 50mm spherical, the 5th generation Pre-ASPH Summicon, as well as the f1 Noctilux. As with most Leica lenses, it's pretty difficult to find something negative to say beyond the price tag, but that being said, more than I think most other lenses, you can see every penny in the photos and in the build quality and design of the 50mm Summilux spherical. And it wouldn't surprise me if your Summilux outlasted you and continued to take great photos for many generations. Other than that, I could see some users not being 100% satisfied with the shape of the bokeh when stopped down. Similar to other Leica lenses of the era, the aperture on the Summilux 50mm spherical isn't completely circular and can render some octagonal shaped bokeh. The shape of the aperture doesn't really bother me too much when I use a 28 or 35mm lens, but with the compression that you get on a 50mm lens that's this fast, it can be a little bit more noticeable in some circumstances. But beyond pixel peeping, I feel like this isn't going to be really an issue for most people when it comes to real-world photos. When used wide open though, you get clean circular bokeh in the middle as it becomes more cat's eye around the edges. As you may have guessed from the way I worded the intro, as well as the lack of video footage of this lens, I didn't end up picking one up after all. By no means does that make this lens a bad one, I just think it didn't fit my ideals as a rangefinder lens. On Leicas, I mainly like to do travel and street photography, and often on film, and although this lens on an M3 is a special experience, for my style, I just didn't find myself using f1.4 enough to justify picking up this lens. Although this lens is extremely sharp at f1.4, I tend to like to use a more forgiving aperture when it comes to street photography, as well as include more information in the background of my photos, even when intentionally blurring the background. And while the 50mm Summilux spherical might seem compact when compared to SLR lenses, when it comes to rangefinders, I find that this lens is on the slightly larger side, being less than ideal for me. Not as large as the Noctilux, of course, but I find that compact lenses like the 50mm Summicon, or even more so the 50mm Elmar-M, truly embody the film rangefinder ethos, while the Summilux 50mm spherical is the poster child for digital Leica. Undoubtedly, this is going to be many people's dream lens, let alone 50, it's just not mine. In fact, after testing out many M-mount 50mm lenses, I never really could commit to a single lens like I could say for the 35mm Summicon spherical. 50mm lenses are often so hotly debated because you have so much variety when it comes to character and design, which makes things more subjective but also more interesting, as you could see with a crude comparison between the Leica 50s. Even lenses from the same manufacturer can render in very different ways. For example, I probably wouldn't take the Noctilux with me on vacation, but for a wedding portrait or something similar to that, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a better lens for that occasion. But the Leica Summilux 50mm spherical does seem very versatile if you only want one 50mm lens for your general use. And in the process of trying to find the perfect M-mount 50mm lens, I went through a variety of lenses, both Leica and otherwise, and as it turns out, well, I'm probably more of a fan of 35mm lenses in the end. That might be pretty disappointing if you're watching this video as a fan of 50mm lenses. The Summilux spherical might definitely be one of the best all-time 50mm lenses ever made, but for me, I just jive much better with 35mm lenses. and really haven't found the need to search for anything beyond the 35mm Summicon spherical. That is probably one of the most perfect lenses ever made in my opinion for my use and my style. But that's a video for another day. I hope you enjoyed this one. I'm David, and I'll be back with more soon. Thanks.